G'day, g'day. Wherever you are in the world of the internet or on the iTunes, this is Mastering Music, Mastering Life, and we're back for another episode. I'm your host, Tony Jack the Bear Mance, and today with me from, is it North or South CAC?
North Carolina.
Yeah, well, apparently the locals there know as North CAC. That's like, so North CAC represent. You know?
Okay.
So Mr. Dave McNair from Dave McNair Mastering in North Carolina. Guy who's worked with all the big names, worked in all the big studios, been there, done that. And more importantly, a good friend of mine. So welcome to the podcast, Dave.
Very glad to be here. Very glad to be here, Tony. We've been phone and video friends now for quite a few years, and it was because you, as an outgoing love of mastering and mastering engineers, all around gregarious personality, just cold call me, I don't know, 12 something years ago, maybe more, and congratulated me on getting a job at a studio. And I thought that was just so cool of you to just call and say, hey, just wanted to call and say congratulations, and really touched me, and we've been friends ever since.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, well, I think it's important that I learned that a great way to raise your own significance is raise the significance of others, and particularly when it comes to a good place. And because when you landed that job at Sterling, I mean, even today, I mean, Sterling's still one of the premier mastering houses in the world.
Definitely, yeah.
And anyone that is good enough to land a job in there in any capacity, you've got to be at the top of your game. You won't get in the door if you're not good, and you certainly won't last if you're not that good. And so you went in there and you did your time, and you had a great long career out of there. Well done, my friend. What can I say?
Thanks. Yeah, it was a good phase, career-wise. Truthfully, there's a lot of stuff personally that was going on for me it was not a great time. It was a good time professionally, but when I look back on those days, there was a lot of things going on that made it kind of, I won't say it was bittersweet, but my perception of being there might have been slightly clouded by other things going on in my life at the time. And so, I feel great about being asked to work there, and I did good work while I was there. But it just came a time to move on to another phase, partially from personal events going on. And I'm in a much happier place now, way happier place. Things are really good for me these days.
That's awesome. You can tell that in your voice. And I think just over the journey, ever since you moved, that was very evident. And so what was, are you able to divulge? Are you happy to divulge what was, in as much as you want to divulge, what was happening for you?
It was, I won't go into it in too much detail, but it was, it had to do with my teenage son needed more of my attention than I think I could give by spending 2.5 hours a day commuting every day and being kind of unavailable. And it eventually, not long after I left Sterling, a couple of months after that, I ended up moving to Texas. I don't know, maybe 6 months. I don't know. It's all kind of a blur at this point. And spending about 2.5 years down there, getting him through a special school program that he needed to move to the next phase of his life. He's doing great now. He's a great kid. He was great then. He's a fine young man now. But that was just kind of one of those situations where the family was more important than a title, on your gig.
Yeah.
So so I did that, and that actually worked out really great on a lot of levels. Uh, it's such a long, complex story. I don't know. I'm not. I don't have anything.
Well,
Not to
I
be
think
personal, but it's not. I don't know if I if we got.
I think that that sums it up, and I think it's very noble, and it's something that a lot of people probably wouldn't do. You know, they just kind of think, well, you know, kids are resilient; they'll get through it. And particularly when you're doing something that you're really happy in, and
Yeah.
you climb the top of the mountain, so to speak. And you know, career is so important to us blokes because a lot of our identity comes from it, particularly when it's something that we love doing. And
Yeah.
then this comes along, and so man, I think it's very honourable of you.
Thanks. You know, it was for me. I right about the time I left Master Disc and went to Sterling, I still had a really, really strong, ultra kind of competitive, get ahead, you know, whale moving through the water to get as many plankton as possible, you know, or maybe shark is a better analogy. But a couple of years into Sterling, there were so many problems at home that I couldn't really be that guy anymore. And, you know, working in a place like Sterling, you can't just kind of sit still. You have to always be very proactive. And I wasn't willing to do that to the exclusion of what I needed to do family wise. So that's kind of, that played into a lot of that situation, but it worked out fantastic in the end. I think I'm in a much happier place now. I mean, I think everything about it was kind of fortuitous, and you know, it all worked out really well. I'm very happy with my clients and to be in the little niche that I am at this point.
So tell us about the rebuilding process. So when you started, you know, obviously there was a point where you had to start earning. How did you rebuild the studio from scratch? What did you do? How did you get resources together? Because for a lot of
Well,
people, starting again or from scratch or rebuilding or going into another phase or chapter, any kind of
right,
change, for people, it's pretty daunting at times. So take
right.
us through that process, and how did that go for you?
Well, I didn't just immediately shift gears. I made a decision at some point that I was going to shift gears, and I kind of figured, what do I need to be able to do this? Um, and I actually owned a lot of gear already during the disc days and the Sterling days. So I only needed a few things. So I just kind of bought the last couple of things I needed. And then when we decided to part ways, I set my stuff up at a friend of mine, had a studio in Jersey, not far from where we lived at the time. Ed Lippman, great guy, great mastering engineer. But I was actually just working too much. I thought it was going to work out. I thought I could get in early in the day, but I needed more access to his room. So that only went like on for a couple of months. And then I moved everything to my house and set it up in the basement, thinking, well, this is probably not going to sound that great, but I need to have access to it all the time because I'm just working too much. And it ended up actually sounding pretty good. And it worked fine. And I did the normal things you do. Like I made sure the electrical wiring, I redid some of that, got the dedicated 20 amp service and put in balance power and a lot of, you know, little things like that. But I remember there was a short period of time there for about 3 or 4 months before I ended up moving to Texas with my son to put him through this program that I was working out of the basement. And, you know, Tony Visconti said, I got a project for you to do, but I have to attend. And I said, you sure you don't want to just send it? I mean, man, dude, you don't want to ride the train out to my house and be in my basement in Jersey. And he's like, no, I have no problem coming to your basement. That's fine. And I really have to be here for this one. And then it ended up being not the final David Bowie record, but the David Bowie record that was his sort of his first album in like 10 years or something. And so it was kind of a surreal thing for him to kind of come out. And I'd done a bunch of projects for him before, but in, big formal studios. And he sort of came out to my basement and didn't think anything of it. And we had a good time. And
how did you two guys meet up, and what was the first project you worked on?
It was a while ago. I was at Master Disc, and I don't know, I guess he just got my name from somebody and came in, and he had I think it might have been, I don't remember what it was, but I'm terrible with like remembering projects.
Nonetheless, you got his interest. He gave you a shot.
Yeah. I haven't done anything with him in a while, but we had a pretty good stretch there for him. So.
Now, before I go on, if I don't ask this question, Adam Dempsey will have my guts for garters. He asked me to ask you about the record where apparently it was reported that you'd only use one band of an NS EQ10 of a Millennium Media EQ. Do you recall that? Do you recall that instance?
Which?
I don't know what track, but it was a Bowie track where.
Oh! It was the first single off of that record. Was this really kind of beautiful and kind of dark ballad. I can't think of the name of it either. Once again, that's like
anyway, but it only needed one band.
We did actually. I think we did it flat the first time, and Tony called and said, "I think it's good, but it might have too much bass." And I went, "Okay, let me run it again." And I just turned down 50 hertz shelf a few dB or something. It was Tony Levin was playing bass, and it got kind of subterranean, and it was kind of one of those things where it probably was fine either way, but it probably popped a little better on the radio with a little bit less of that sub. I don't know. But.
Yeah. How often do you get that luxury? For me, getting those mixes that come in and you throw it up and you just go, wow, it's a beautiful day outside.
Yeah. Well, the hard thing is that that's the hardest thing, is knowing when not to do anything to it, maybe a little level or something. But yeah, I've had this discussion with my friends a lot. And when you've been doing it like we have for a while, and you've gotten very used to taking it as far as you can take it. In other words, one of the things I figured out early on is that in the beginning, well, this is my career path with mastering. In the beginning, I would go, oh, I was naive enough to think, a little bass and treble, or maybe almost nothing, and some level, and we're good. And then I sort of realized there was a lot more to it than that. And to be honest, I started out mastering my own mixes. So, and I'm a pretty good mixer, so maybe I could get by with a dB of 10K and a dB of 100, or, not even that much. But then when I decided to kind of get out of mixing and get into mastering, and I started to do other people's stuff, I would go, okay, well, I can maybe do a little more and make this sound better. And then the next phase of the learning curve was to do too much most of the time. And then you kind of get back, at least I did, I got back to where I would very, very routinely do much, much less. But then you start to realize that there's a sweet spot between being conservative and letting everything about the mix be great, and going right to the edge of the wall without going too far. It's like driving a Ferrari, redlining it and seeing how far you can go before you have to hit the brakes to stop right before the wall. And when you get pretty good at being able to take a B quality mix and make it sound A quality, because you're really doing a lot of shit to it, but you're doing it in a way that's really enhancing it, and it's not, you can't tell that things have been done, the listener can't tell, and you get comfortable with that. It was harder for me to immediately flip into there's nothing I can do to this at all to make it sound better.
Yeah.
and I, like I might get an album of 10 songs and maybe they're extremely well done. And I do a few things on 5 songs and do less than a few things on 1 song, and 4 songs have nothing, but that's just kind of the story there.
It's a real luxury for me.
Yeah.
I
love it when I can do it. And the funniest thing is that even if you only make it like, a dB and a half louder or 2 dB louder, it still changes enough sonically, hopefully not in a negative way, that the clients are always like, oh my God, it's amazing. I'm like, I didn't do anything. Like, well, it just, something about it sounds better.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because I think it also comes down to expectations of people, what they want out of the process. For some, it's all about the minimalism because they're just, it's their art. They've got a particular vision for it. They spent a lot of time working on it, and that's great. And then there are other people who just think that you're going to take cat piss and turn it into champagne. And I know along the course of my my career, there's been a constant educating of clients or helping them understand, because even to this day, Dave, it still fascinates me that, with the internet and forums, mastering still seems to have this reputation of this black art. There's still some kind of misunderstanding around it, despite how much information's been out there, especially the last 10 years. It still fascinates me how there is, I don't want to say ignorance, but still, like back in the day when it was all about the black art, that still seems to exist in my world. You experience that, or you find your clients overall are just much more hip and educated, and grew up in a different ecosystem?
Mine are not just massive. I mean, there's a couple that are of old timers that have they know exactly how the whole thing works, but probably the majority of them are not particularly well versed, and they don't have a massive working knowledge of exactly what happens. Yeah, and I have to say, that's where I need my meditation and my mindfulness, because I can have a very short fuse with some weeks. Some weeks are great, and some weeks are a constant stream of people that don't know anything about stuff. And I have to, I actually have kind of, because it suits me the best, I kind of learned a long time ago that even though I like people, I like hanging out with people, I have some really close friends, I'm not a real people person, and I don't really like dealing with clients any more than I have to. So I have a full-time person that does all that. So I would say about 90% of the time, for good or for bad, some people might think it's not a good attitude, I never talk to them. I don't know what's going on. I get it. I do it. It goes out. Sometimes I don't even know what they think about it. And I'll have to ask my project person, Danielle, is like, how was that? She's like, oh, they loved it. They got back to us weeks ago because I've even forgotten about it.
Yeah. I think everyone does it differently. And I think as more sessions are becoming more unattended, maybe there's less expectation. Whereas I remember Bo taught me how to cut lacquers, Rick Essig. It was in Frankfurt, Wayne, New York, and he used to tell me, 80% of this job is bullshit. Which what he was referring to was the hang time. Because obviously a lot of sessions were attended, apart from the international ones, but still a healthy proportion of attended sessions. So there was the, a bit of shit talking, a bit of banter, and you're filming.
I love that. In fact, I love when people attend. Like, I'm good with that. I just don't want to deal with the back and forth stuff. Like I will, because to me, that's like a hang. That's like me going to somebody's gig and meeting the band. Like, I'm fine with that. I just don't want to deal with all the phone calls and the
Okay.
emails and
Yeah.
explaining to them about, you know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not a people person. It's just that you, I think I think as we get older and busier and expand in our business, and Chris Athens talked about this on a post on the World Master Engineers Worldwide Forum. Well, the initial question was, what things you put in place to build your efficiency, or as a general question. And it was a good question, and people came in and chimed in with some good things, whether it was around, their health or time management, or could have been gear, software, could have been, and Chris chimed in and talked about delegating, because when he went from, went from Sterling and landed in Austin, he said, look, I had to do everything, which is understandable. He's starting from scratch. And apart from the mastering, which is obviously what he does and does really well, he said, the other stuff didn't do that well, but it was out of necessity. And then as it grew, he started to delegate.
Yep.
And I think that was a really, really good post, and it makes a lot of sense. And it takes a bit for someone to actually know what their strengths are, where they're good at. And again, if from a practical point of view, if you're, I'm just throwing arbitrary figures. Okay. These aren't, but let's just say you're earning $100 an hour doing your job, but yet you could pass on a job to someone and pay them $25, $30. Frees you up to be able to make that $100. You're employing someone else. You're still making some profit, and it's kind of win-win all round. And
I absolutely agree. And it's taken me a long time to get to that spot too, because I was a sole owner operator and did everything all the days before Master Disc and Sterling and all the days after, up until just the last several years. And I realized the benefit of the project manager very much after the Master Disc and Sterling days. And that was the one thing that I kind of wasn't really willing to do. I mean, I tried doing it all myself for about 3 months. I was like, this is never going to work. And then I was lucky enough to get the person that I have who's amazing. But to your point, I'm getting ready to expand the business yet again. And a big part of that is bringing on a couple of guys to do work that will, in the short term, I will have a little more overhead with them and getting them up and going and having them as part of the team. But I'm ultimately, it's so that I can have a little more free time to do other things, and maybe even pursue more work opportunities, but not in a way like I'm trying to be some, big conglomerate or something, just in a very small kind of home cooked way that fits in this weird little kind of niche that I have, where I'm, creating a little community of people doing stuff.
I know exactly what you mean, because I'm smack bang in that process now.
You've been doing it for a while. You've been doing it successfully with your guys. So,
and in particular with my boy, Tom, who's, younger guy that's come through, and realizing his potential. And I thought, back in the day when there was assisting, now I didn't grow up as the classic intern, but I got to do a lot of it at different places. And I guess it was a different system back there. But the days now of taking a kid and making them work for 2 years, for countless hours for no money, because you know what, man, it's like, you are so fucking lucky, man, that you can even get to take a piss in our urinal.
Yeah.
Whereas now you can't treat a kid that way. Not that we would or you should, but I thought to myself, you know what? Okay, it's one thing to let a kid prove themselves and show their character and whatever, and I think that's something you can establish pretty early. But the best way to teach kids now, I think, is just throw them in the deep end under some supervision, but give them opportunities, let them do their thing. Because my philosophy was, if I can help this kid become his own man and make bank for him, then I'm going to make bank too. And then that's going to free up my time because, as you know, I've got a passion for mentoring and speaking, and I want to expand on that because it's just another passion. And so, well, how do I make this work? And, there's a practical side of living. I've got to pay my mortgage and my wife's maintenance money. So I'm just being facetious.
But the point is you took the less easy step. The easier thing would be to keep things going, as it were. You took the more difficult step that requires a little bit more of your investment of time, and eventually at some point, a little bit, some of that $100 an hour, hypothetical, but you made a commitment to kind of go through a less easy period in pursuit of something better on down the line. And I think that is what any small business game is all about, is working your ass off to get to sort of a critical point as far as you can on your own. And then sort of realizing that the way you're going to keep your sanity and the way you're going to have a better quality of life is to actually then give up some of that profit and spend a little time educating some people to bring them in as part of your business. And it's the classic conundrum of any small business is how do we expand a little bit without, giving everything away and going under and all that sort of stuff. So,
yeah, well, I remember we've talked about this quite a bit, but you're a guy, you don't make a song and dance about it like I do. But you're a guy that does a lot of mentoring. You help a lot of kids out.
I do as much as I can. Yeah.
You collaborate with other studios and do what you can to form a sense of community where you are. Yeah. And it's not for everyone. I mean, some people just aren't that way inclined and what have you. But I think all of us who are still at it have been beneficiaries of good mentoring, and not just in the studio and the technical and artistic aspects of the work, but just in the the dealing with people and business and all that other shit. And so I remember I just felt so fortunate that I had such great mentoring from people that didn't know me, had nothing to benefit from me. They owed me nothing, and yet they were still gracious enough. And I just always made a promise to myself that if I ever got to a situation where one day I'd have my own thing, I would do the same thing.
The kind of the sort of altruistic giving it back thing, and being kind of obsessive compulsive about getting ahead and building your brand, those two things don't really go together. They're pretty oppositional forces. And I think in today's world, if you can find a way for those two things to coexist in your own work and your own sensibilities, you're not going to have an ulcer and a self-generated breast cancer by the time you're 50 if you can cultivate a sense of service to whether it's in the organization that you're working within or something else you're passionate about. But it's hard in this what's in it for me world to really get on board with that. I had to get old. I had to grow into it,
Join the club, my friend. I've said many times I'm a classic late bloomer, and I'm more than okay with that. I think I feel happier. I'd rather go once I get to that point in my life, if I get a chance to reflect and I'm in my final hours, to have less regrets and say, well, I'm glad at least I got there, rather than live with a whole bunch of regrets and then realize, have my aha moment then when it's really too late to be able to do anything about it.
I'll just tell a super short story for for somebody out there who is kind of getting started, and like one example of like how this stuff works. Okay. I'm in Houston and I put together a studio and in a living room in a dining room of this rental house that I was in for 2.5 years while I was there with my son. And I didn't know very many people in Houston, but I met some guys at a local studio there called Sugar Hill. And one of the guys was, he was doing mastering. He was a little new to mastering at the time. He'd been doing it for a little while, but he was also still kind of mixing and sort of doing a little bit of everything. His name was Chris Longwood. And Chris and I we got along fine in the beginning. And he's like, man, I would like to come over and see your stuff. And he came over and did my thing. And I said, I really need to put up some more acoustical treatment and do some stuff. And I want to do this. He's like, oh man, I'll come over and help you. And he came over and spent days putting everything up and getting it all organized and helping me wire the studio. And, is super helpful. And I started to show him some stuff. He's like, and I said, well, let me show you some. I said, do you know how this signal flow thing works? And he'd never seen how a more pro mastering setup with a console where you have, level matched, pre-process, and, he hadn't seen it like the regular studios do it. And it kind of opened his world. And, he ended up slowly buying some of the right kind of pieces of gear at his studio at Sugar Hill. And we would do a regular thing where he would come over and I'd show him stuff. And then when I moved here, he drove my car while I drove the truck. He completely broke the studio down, spent 3 days of his time breaking the studio down with me, loading the thing up, driving here. And then he started coming here every 4 or 5 months, and he'd spend 2 weeks. I'd let him sleep in my house and he'd work out of my room and I'd show him more stuff. Sometimes I'd send him mixes and say, show me what you got. And he'd send me stuff back. I'd send him mine. He'd be like, how'd you do that? Well, he's now uprooting his life, and he and his girlfriend are moving here in a couple of weeks to be my assistant full time.
Wow. How cool is that?
So I trained him without thinking I was training somebody to be an assistant, just over this period of sort of 4+ years. And he's specifically, he'll continue to do his business, which has grown to be a pretty nice business, but then he'll sort of work under my roof. But he also is really passionate about lacquer cutting, and he's going to probably cut about 90% of the lacquers when that gets online. So
that's great.
And he's done some cutting himself too, so it's perfect.
So tell me about your lathe and when you hope to get that up and going.
Well, it's been a 2-year process, and it gets here Christmas Eve. It gets here December 24th.
Awesome.
So, yeah. And then the tech, Dylan gets here from LA on, Chris and his girlfriend get here the 28th to move the studio yet again out of my house into the garage, which I've fixed up the garage as an interim place for the lathe and the studio. So, and then Dylan and Tech gets here January 2nd. So this is why I'm stressed out and I can't really form sentences right now, because I decided to not only double down, but triple down. What happened is 2 years ago, I made a decision to get the lathe, but I hadn't decided to do a studio. I was kicking that can down the road, and I thought, maybe I'll remodel the garage. But right now it's in a room in the house, and I knew it was never going to be that forever, but it suits my purposes fine now. But I want to have more attended sessions. I want to have the lathe. I want to have a real place. I want to have a facility like yours. It's kind of nice for clients to come in. And so, but what happened is the timelines got all pushed together. So I decided to just roll the dice and double down. It almost doesn't make any sense at all. I was able to justify it mentally by a couple of strange quirks of mental gymnastics. But at the end of the year, I got the commercial mortgage and bought a building.
Good for you.
And I bought a building. It was a great deal. It's 5 blocks from my house. I can ride my bike or walk to it. It's a beautiful 4,000 square foot old commercial building, 20-foot ceilings. Price was incredible. So I closed on the building, got the loan, and got the money for the build out. Not quite enough money for the build out, but that's a different story. And then the lathe finally is getting finished. It should have been finished a year ago, but that's a different story. So I didn't want to put the lathe in my living room, and I couldn't put it in the room where the studio is now, and I wanted to get it online. So I had to do a quick fix up to the garage.
Yeah.
So I had to bring some guys in and insulate and sheetrock and sound treat and put in a 30 amp service and a HVAC and the whole deal in the garage so that I can move all my shit from the house 60 feet to the detached garage and work for 6 or 8 months while the studio is being built.
Right.
And then move all the shit again. So that's why I'm kind of a quivering puddle of uncertainty. But you know what? You only live once. Why the fuck not? You know?
Totally, man. You got to roll the dice. And I think I always applaud people, especially in the current environment, who are prepared to put their balls in the line and do their thing. You know, the last example of someone I did that here was, you know, Matthew Gray a few years ago, you know, and he went out and did his room with Thomas J. And I always thought, you know what, more power to him, you know, the kid, because I remember him when he was first starting out, and he was also enthusiastic and always wanted to do things at the highest level, just a complete fucking nutter. You know, I just admire him for his passion and enthusiasm.
Yeah.
And I think there would have been quite a few people that would have thought, well, shit, man, you know, look at the market, look how it's going. Why'd you spend so much money? And, you know, he's got his second mix room, which is, you know, just about built and doing well. And I was told in 2006 I was crazy doing what I was doing, because that was the time when MP3s were starting to sort of happen. And it was the, you know, the beginning of the so-called end of music as we knew it, or the industry as we knew it. And I thought, you know what, man, it's I'd rather go through life and say, at least I gave it a shot, than to say I wish I had.
You know, the worst, it's not human nature. We think that we want to have some control over the future, or we want to think that we've got it kind of figured out enough to where this chance that we're going to take is not as scary as we think it's going to be. And you certainly need to do your due diligence, and you need to look soberly at a business plan or whatever the situation. You know, I'm going to open a coffee shop at the mall. You know, how many people a day do they get? You know, you don't need to just out of the blue decide you're going to have an idea and do it. But if you've done some kind of diligence and you're like, hey, I've been doing this for, you know, 40 fucking years or whatever the deal is, and people still call me to do it, and you know, robots replacing mastering is, you know, that could easily happen. So could World War III. So could getting hit by a fucking bus when you cross the street. Like, you can always justify a way out of it. But let's just say you don't know what's going to happen, but you've got a pretty good idea. It seems like it's a good step to take. I'm going to quit working for this company doing XYZ and go to work for next to nothing for this guy doing mastering, and because I'm pretty good at it. My friends think I'm, you know, whatever the situation. Well, you know what the worst that can happen is? It doesn't work out.
Yeah.
No one's going to die. It just may not work out, and then you figure out how to do something else. You know, it's just, I know that's a little simplistic, but, you know.
No. I think you're right. I think also because for all of us, the reason why we don't do what we don't really want to do or hope to do, it's fear, and the story we tell ourselves around what we think is going to happen. And like you said, you do your due diligence. But I don't know about you, Dave McNair, but no matter how well I might plan something, things just kind of happened and went awry, and not because of me being necessarily slack, but we're so left brain focused and programmed to think in a linear fashion, and life is anything but. And things just come out of left field that you can't necessarily predict. We want things to be safe and comfortable and predictable, and they don't happen. We get upset, we get pissed off. and then we take it out on ourselves because all of a sudden this reflects badly on us. You know,
Right.
so I understand why people either don't go for it because of their need for security, safety, and also the fact that the failing or potential failing is something that they just don't know how they're going to handle it, how they're going to take it, or they know there's going to be shit along the way, and they're just too afraid to go in that direction.
And some people just, I mean, I have a lot of compassion for people that's just not, it's not going to eat at them and destroy their serenity because they didn't take some crazy leap of faith and, you know, figure out a way to get somebody to loan them a bunch of money. And like that, not everyone is called to, not everyone is going to, like, the proverbial, you know, wake up at 50 or something and go, oh, well, why didn't I fucking do that? I mean, not everybody has that kind of personality. A lot of people are like, yeah, I did my thing and I worked for so-and-so and I did my, you know, and had, you know, like, it's not a foregone conclusion that everybody should, you know, roll the dice to realize your dreams or something. It's, you know, not everybody has to do that. If somebody's built like that, you know.
Yeah, there are generally some people that they're happy doing their thing, and they're 9 to 5, and they're genuinely content. And but again, it's that's the biggest cause of frustration for all of us, and that is that we think that other people think like us, and we're without realizing and imposing our set of values, and because it doesn't match up with what we think, all of a sudden, how can they be happy? What the fuck? What, clocking on, clocking off? It's not my thing, but who am I to say that you're a fuckwit doing what you're doing?
Yeah, the security or their sense of their perceived security may be the thing that they really need in their life, you know, to feel good about things. And that's valid. I totally get that. I mean, you know, but yeah, you're right. Your point though is very well taken about fear. Fear is all the motivations are basically, there's always fear at the bottom of them. If you dig deep enough, you'll find, you know.
Yeah.
You know, I'm trying to eliminate as much of that in my life as possible.
Yeah. Well, you know, some fear is okay. I mean, I'd fear a rattlesnake. That's a reasonable fear, would it not?
Yeah.
But yeah, you know what I mean. I think quite a lot of the time, the things in my life that I really got into a frenzy over, for the most part, didn't eventuate at all. And if there was some semblance of it coming to fruition, it was nowhere near as bad as what I thought. You know, because our perception is so strong about how we create our reality, you know, and whatnot. Tell me a little about your mindfulness, mate.
Well, I mean, it probably started a long time ago, but I only got really serious about it when I had to, or I was going to go crazy, and that was probably 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, 8 years ago. I don't know. Relatively recently. And, you know, I'd always been interested in all that stuff and read books and things like that and knew people that were Buddhists and, you know, but I tried meditating. I'm like, I can't fucking turn my mind off. This is bullshit. That just doesn't work for me. How can you? And it just clicked one time and I got into it, and it was, there was some kind of dark stuff going on personal wise, family wise. I mean, it was a tough situation at home for a lot of reasons. Through no one's fault. That was what was going on. And so I think I was really looking for a way to quiet my mind and to not have a nervous breakdown. So I think I had something was at stake. And, you know, unless you've really kind of got something at stake, it's not the easiest thing. It's meditation is not a real easy. People don't take to it. You have to really want to find something out of it. So anyway, I was at the right place in my life and I really got into it. And I became more interested in it and read more and started going to different kind of Buddhist services. And over the years, I just I'm really into Zen, which is a uh, Japanese Buddhism. I just recently did my first 7-day silent retreat, which was amazing. 4 in the morning until 9 at night, 7 days. Work, 3 meals a day and work breaks and things like that, but very little talking, and a lot of meditating. And I had several transcendent experiences. I had some enlightenment experiences.
Tell us about those. What happened?
One was in the evening, and the sound of the insects it was like day 5, and the sound of the insects were so strong, and I was in such a state of no thought that I suddenly just had this conceptualization that my body had just merged with the sound of the insects. And I simultaneously had this view in my mind of what the ocean looks like when the sun is on it very strongly, and you see the glitter of the diffraction of the light, reflection. So it was this kind of simultaneous visual image, but also this sonic thing of the sound of these insects at night. Because the Zendo, which is the room where you meditate at a traditional Zen monastery, usually has windows, and the weather was nice, so all the windows were open. And I'm sitting there with like 30 people. I don't remember if we had a visitation. This like 84-year-old Japanese Zen master and his entourage of 3 of the monks visited for 3 days, and he was a riot. He didn't speak English, but he had an interpreter. He was really funny. It might have been while they were sitting with us too, but it was a deep experience. And also my father passed away while I was there, which made things super deep, because I had the best counseling you could possibly have while I was there. The head of the monastery there is just totally amazing person. And for people that don't know, traditional Zen 7-day sesshin, you get what are called interviews. And usually once in the morning and once in the evening, a bell clings. There's a very specific order to everything. And you go in the office of the resident Zen master teacher, and you can sit with them for a couple of minutes, and he asks you questions or tells you stuff, and you can ask him questions. And of course, my dialogue with the master at this place was all about my father's passing and what that means. And it was the heaviest thing. It was amazing. It was just it was very enlightenment of many levels.
Did you have a good relationship with your dad?
I did. Yeah, I mean, he had a great long life. He was we knew we knew it was natural causes. It wasn't like any one thing, and we knew that he was wasn't going to be around too much longer, but you're never prepared really. And I thought I would kind of be stoic and about it. And yeah, I mean, we had a typical relationship where he pissed me off and I pissed him off at times. But
yeah,
he was, yeah, I mean, he was a great parent, and was responsible for me getting into audio engineering when I was 20 or 21, I think.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So I have him to thank for my lifelong career that I've loved. So,
well, you're a very fortunate man, Dave McNair, because I think a lot of men, young men, older men, probably have very different experiences when it comes to. Mine certainly was very different, and even though my dad passed in 2006, I'm right now in the current stage of life where I'm revisiting all this other stuff that's been unresolved. But I guess life told me.
How was that for you? How was his passing? How did you react to all that?
At the time when my dad passed, it was interesting because up until then I had so much anger towards him it was just a lack of his validation, because my whole life was all about getting dad, to love me and stuff. And so, because I didn't.
I'm same boat, same exact thing.
And dad Dad himself was meant to be, came from an academic lineage, lots of smart people, and he was the only one of the whole of of all his siblings that didn't pursue his ambition. And so, of course, thought, well, he'd live vicariously through me. So it's it's not a unique story. It's almost cliche, many instances. But to answer your question, I mixed emotions really, because I hadn't had much to do with him. I was hadn't seen him for many, many, many years. Had my own life, but I wasn't. I was sad, but not in the same way that people would feel. And it may sound horrible.
Was there a point at some point years ago where you said, you know what, I don't need this bastard. He's just grieving. He's just aggravating me. I don't really want to have a relationship with him anymore.
As far as being a teenager, I was again, it's not great growing up. But again, it was just and again, not that mine's anything particularly special, but it was, my dad had certain expectations and he had a certain set of rules. But I guess what I got out of it is this: how's that? I imagine that my old man probably had even worse dad in some respects, and I just had to learn to give him a break. And the long and short of it was, at the time of his passing, he was in palliative care, and this nurse said, "Look, your dad's got a lot of stuff and regrets, and which is unfortunate because he went to his grave with a lot of regret. Not that I don't know anything about it, but I think that's sad, just knowing that." Yeah. And so I realized that, when you chase validation from anybody, when your validation comes from an external source or from a person or from a peer group or from a possession, and you realize that you got to be your own cheerlead, your cheer squad first, then ironically, in my experience, once I gave up on that, validation came in a more natural, organic, and beautiful way, and was more fulfilling. And so, giving up the attachment to it, and I'm still working through that. I mean, I think we all love to be validated. We all want to be validated. There's nothing wrong with being validated. I think the distinction is not to attribute your self-worth to those things, and that's a tricky one.
Well, one reason why Buddhism works so well for me is one of the basic concepts there is that in the same way that I'm not just an expert on this, so I don't want to mischaracterize it, but the problem with validation is that we think we need it to feel good, from programming, from whatever, like, oh, I've got something cool I can impress my dad with, or, well, whatever the situation may be. But the problem is it doesn't last. And so you need more of that. Like, that's the one is never enough. So, like, how many number one records do you have to have, or how many gold records, or how many chart topping songs, or how many, well, when you realize through a pursuit of mindfulness that it's never enough, then you sort of give up being attached to that bringing you happiness. Now, when you get it, when something comes along, you can sort of be happy about it and celebrate it in a way that it's of a transient nature, and that it's not going to ultimately bring you happiness, but it's not to be held away from you or to be downplayed or whatever. In the past, I've been very guilty of, like, I don't want to tell anybody about anything that is successful, and I've got a back room full of gold records and Grammys and stuff. I've never framed them, never hung them up. They're just like almost in a back, like I'm almost
an afterthought.
Ashamed of them, because that would be too, and I did kind of a lot of therapy around that. It was my dad was rolled into this whole thing, and I'm finally sort of getting to the point where I'm okay with, if somebody asks me about it, telling them about some of my accomplishments, rather than just like, oh, report on stuff, whatever, like, because it's just finding a balance. It's just finding some kind of healthy balance, really,
Yeah. Well, I think those kind of things are nice. I did a little short Facebook Live a week or so ago, maybe a week, talking about the whole thing of awards and accolades, because on my feed, quite a few of our colleagues and friends have been nominated, and congratulations again to those people, and good luck to them when they announce the Grammys in early part of, I think it's February next year, Grammys.
Yeah.
And I think it's wonderful, and I think it's to be celebrated and good on them. And these things are great, from a marketing perspective, especially if you win. I think they can be beneficial. I don't necessarily know if they are the thing that's going to get you over the line, or the thing that's the final thing that when people are deciding. I think it certainly helps and whatnot. But for me, I put it up because it's about so much cynicism around people, and whether it's because they're disgruntled, or they they feel that the system's not fair, or that it's stacked, or it's nepotism, or and they miss the point. And the point being that, I know it sounds a real cliche, but I come up with this thing of that man makes the award and music is the reward. And just the fact that, and as trite as it may sound, the fact that all of us are in the gig doing it and we're able to make a living off it, that is the quote unquote making it. That is the ultimate award and validation. The fact is that, some poor bastard thinks I'm actually good enough to part with some hard-earned money.
Well, yeah, to me, the ultimate reward is, I have intentionally put myself in a place, in the business by living here. Like, everything I've done has been very intentional, so that I don't have to, I'm not so much worried about money all the time, and I don't have to pound for as many jobs as I can possibly work. And I'm hitting the sweet spot where the thing that comes to me first is bike riding, going to the gym, meditating, all that kind of stuff. And then I fit all the other work in around that. And so for me, the gratification is certainly being able to do the job. But I've been doing the job for so long and paying the bills, going back to recording, that I've almost forgotten that. The ultimate reward for me is, let me phrase it this way. If you get paid your top highest rate, and there's a whole bunch of parts to do, and alternative, and one particular gig is like, wow, this is a pretty serious fucking invoice, but you know what? The music sucked, and they're beginners, and they didn't even know what I did was good, versus the guy that's just starting out, that's barely got anything, but his stuff is really good, and you really did a good job on it, and they were so thankful that you elevated the quality. That, to me, that is the entire reward, is when the clients are super into what you're doing, and the money is just the cream, just the gravy,
Yeah. I hear you. It's interesting how, I don't know about you, Dave, but we're talking about the things that are rewarding, and job satisfaction is great, but doesn't pay the bills. However, I think people would be surprised what we factor in when we're talking about quoting on a job. I don't put a price list up on my website because, not because I'm being coy or anything like that, because no two jobs really are alike, and there are factors. And I'd be less than honest if I didn't say, someone approached me who was a real cool motherfucker, then maybe had 70%, just for argument's sake, of what I would normally like to charge. They were really cool. They were direct. They were respectful. They didn't piss around. They didn't lowball me. You speaking for myself, I am going to be a lot more open to being flexible, because again, we all know what we need to cover ourselves and for hours. We've got to factor those things in roughly. But there are those times where, and in fact, and I know that you've done this too, Dave. There are moments that we will do just charity work. Because they're kids, there's circumstance, whatever. But that's cool too, man. Just in position we can do that. That's rewarding as well. Just to
I'm getting ready to master a jazz record, and the guy's trying to put his Kickstarter together, and his funding is kind of delayed, and he's not quite get as much as he wanted to get. I said, you know what, man? I'll tell you what. You are the leader. It's the guy who wrote the songs, and the leader of the project is the drummer. And I know the caliber of the musicians, and I've heard some of his stuff. It's great. And he's a great player, and he also is an educator, teaches and gives seminars. I said, you know what? I'll trade you drum lessons for mastering a record, because I'm a drummer.
Awesome.
Playing jazz. So yeah, I do trade deals too.
Do you still get on the behind the kit? You have it? Yeah.
Every day. Yeah, man. Yeah, I've got it right. I have it in my living room. You can tell I got a bachelor pad. Actually, my girlfriend was so nice for her to put up with it. But
who have been some of your favorite drummers?
I like all the great jazz guys. I mean, for me, that was the most fun when I was in my earlier career as a recording engineer and kind of mixer producer guy. Recording drummers, that was the thing that I loved more than anything else, is to get a session with a great drummer. There's so many, I could barely name, one guy, but I don't have any. There's so many.
There's a lot of great drummers and percussionists. If I had to pick one, if you put a gun to my head, I'd say Steve Gadd would be that's just me.
Great. Yeah. I mean, rock guys, I think probably Bonham was my favorite for rock guys. I got to record so many great drummers, back during I recorded Jeff Porcaro for months on an album.
Wow.
Right before he passed. He was great. Yeah, he was amazing. Yeah, before a session one time, he would come in early, and I was always there early, and we'd talk drums and stuff, and he was so cool. And I said something about, man, that Rosanna beat, that thing's badass. How'd you come with that? He's like, here, come here, let me show you. And he sat and he's like, and he explained to me, like, of course, now I didn't know, because it's on the web. There's clinics of him explaining how he came up with Rosanna beat, but he gave me my own little personal lesson there about how to play it, how he came up with it and stuff. So
how cool is that?
I could go on and on. I had so many great experiences recording some of the all-time greats. And actually, I thought that I would miss that when I got into mastering, and every once in a while, maybe somebody jogs a memory about something, but mastering was much more my calling. And if I have any regrets, it's that I didn't get into mastering earlier.
Well, you got in.
Yeah.
That's all that matters, mate.
When I started doing it, like in 1998, 99, I thought, I'm getting into this too late. I'm never going to be able to make this work. Everybody's got it. All of the legendary guys, I can't get in. It's a closed shop. That was 20 years ago.
Well, I'm not dissimilar to you, mate. I was 29 when I started my own thing. And I, up until a year ago, I felt like such an imposter.
Yeah.
Through my entire fucking career. A lot of people would think I take the piss. And I wrote a big blog about a year ago.
Yeah.
Because I didn't go through the traditional system like all my other peers and contemporaries. Late start as well.
I didn't go through the traditional, mastering system. I didn't know anything about mastering either. I mean, I kind of taught myself. I mean, there was guys that had started a few years before me, but were, Brad Blackwood showed me a lot of stuff just on the internet and phone calls and stuff like that. A lot of stuff that I didn't, just nuts and bolts kind of stuff. But in terms of like actually, the more creative not creative, but the actual like synergistic craft of like, well, how am I going to EQ this? Because there's, there's 15 ways everywhere from nothing to like all kinds of things, or maybe there's one thing I want to do, but there's 5 ways to do that.
Yeah.
That stuff, I pretty much learned on my own with just random over the years, little slight flashes of insight. So, you don't have to have sat there and watched Bob Ludwig turn the knobs for 5 years to think that you should, fucking know what you're doing. It doesn't.
Yeah. I think it's, and it's a different world now. I think people come into it, that whole system is pretty much dead and buried because of the classic big studio as we know it is, becoming, extinct, shall we say, that,
Yeah.
that style. But still, there are a lot of people there online. I mean, the internet, I tell kids, what, when kids, tell me how they struggle to find this or find that. And I said, man, you got the fucking internet. You got everything at your disposal. When I first started writing letters, I remember writing letters in 1978. And this is letters before internet. I said, man, 5 days to get to America, not knowing if they got it, let alone respond to it, not knowing would come back. This day it's just a click of a mouse. Hey, boom, received. It's a whole different world, and I don't think there's any reason why people can't, kids can't get in, do well, find their niche, find their space, primarily because of this amazing resource that we have right now. Where people can.
Well, the fact that here's one thing that from a mastering perspective, the fact that almost all mixes are digital. Okay, so I'm going to tell people just right up front that this is something that people starting out need to know. Okay, in the old days when the master was on half inch or a DAT tape or whatever, you're not getting your hands on it. It's only going to Ted or Bob or Bernie or something, and it's never seen the light of day except maybe the guy who's the assistant there that comes in at night or on the weekends that runs his own pass of, the latest whatever. Well, now that everything's on digital, of course, file sharing and stuff, mastering, the quickest way you're going to learn is to take master mixes and do your own thing and compare to what happened. Now, I'm not telling you it's going to be easy to get it, but it's not impossible like getting a tape. You need to cozy up to either a mastering facility or a mastering engineer or an artist. And maybe they're not a signed artist. They went, yeah, we sent our latest record to, Jack the Bear, and we were very pleased with it. It's like, oh, really? I'm starting off. Can you let me have the mixes and let me see what I can come up with versus the real guy? That is where you're going to learn more than anything else.
Yeah. And also not to be afraid to ask. I think that I was amazed when I started approaching the guys who I looked up to, how they were almost surprised that I even gave a fuck enough to want to get in touch with them, And again, the perception is, wow, these guys are fucking rock stars. And I think kids now would be surprised, shouldn't be surprised, but that a lot of us are pretty approachable. And when you do it in a way that is, it's honest and it's respectful, because a lot of us, we remember what it was like when, we had our nose pressed up against the glass looking in and nobody knew us and would throw us a bone.
Yeah.
But people did. And so, we live in a world now where we got great resource, lots of people who are willing and open and shouldn't be discouraged. And, if anyone does give them a hard time, well, I think I'd be very surprised if anyone got a really hard time, unless on a bad day. But even then, no excuse for that. And, most people I think are pretty approachable and are happy to share knowledge.
They are. They really are. And I mean, the internet, that's why we're living in such a great time, that if you're sort of cagey enough and ambitious enough and a reasonable person that is, can approach someone with, openness and kindness, I mean, people will generally react. There was just so many times that I can remember working at, you know, XYZ studio, and I had this little place in this studio, and I was in their B room, and I was in Manhattan, and I'd lost a whole bunch of my own facilities due to gentrification, and I'm like, fuck, what am I gonna do? And I was like, oh, okay, these guys are building a studio, and there's a B room. Maybe I can make a deal with them and take some time to master out of there. Well, as it turned out, the studio was okay, but the best thing about it was that in their A room, they had a steady stream of pretty cool clientele. And a lot of it was people that kind of lived in the neighborhood. And Steve Lillywhite's in there all the time. And he's, you know, kind of strolling into my room, and we meet, and he was like, oh, you do some mastering. So, and I was a fan of his production, and I, you know, he's a personable guy, and we got along and stuff. And so he would send me, he'd say, you know, I'm doing the new so-and-so records, and, you know, Ted Jensen or George Marino, whatever, is going to do the records. But, you know, we've got like 3 or 4 B-sides. Why don't you do the B-sides? And instead of just like being super happy to get the work at all, I mean, that was fine. But what really made me happy is I'm getting the mixes from the same mix session as all the rest of these mixes. And it is a cold reality for me to do my thing on their B-sides that sound like just songs on the rest of the record, and then listen to the ones that, you know, Ted or George did. I'm like, holy fuck, I need to get that good. And I, you know, I was like, okay, clearly I have work cut out for me. And at that point I thought, well, I know what's going on. I'm pretty good. You know, like, no, you're not.
Yeah.
And unless you have that situation or put yourself in that situation, you're not going to get better. And so, yeah,
it's one of the reasons why you want to be the dumbest person in the room, because it's the only way you're going to, which isn't hard for me, but really it is the only way you'll get better what you do is to hang with people and, you know, put yourself again, being careful not to compare yourself too hard and keep it all relative. But the reality is,
it's a fine line. I mean, you don't want to, you know, I mean, you know, when I was working at Masterdisc, Scott Hall used to have a phrase. I learned an enormous amount from Scott. He was a fantastic mentor. And he used to say, you know, there's a lot of ways that it can be good. You just have to hit one of those handful of in other words, there's no one way, you know, you're not trying to unlock the Rubik's Cube. There's a lot of ways this can be good. You just have to get in that ballpark of, you know.
Yeah.
And that was a way to sort of stay confident and not be overwhelmed by the multiplicity of options and like, well, which way should I go? What are, you know, and you just say, well, you can go a lot of different ways, but, you know, if you get close enough to where it needs to be, it doesn't really matter whether you trim the bass or turn the treble up, you know, if the net result was the same thing, or, you know, like, or whatever the deal was, you know.
Well, I reckon that kind of conundrum would happen more so, especially if you're in a shootout situation. I mean, and when you know it's a shootout, maybe you won't know who you're shooting out against. Do you find you still get into shootouts, whether it's knowingly or unknowingly? Do you think that that's still a thing?
Yeah, it's definitely a thing. If they tell me they're gonna do a shootout, I usually say no, I don't want to do it, because it's just never usually, in my experience, it's never quite what you think it would be. In other words, theoretically what it should be is like, okay, we're going to go to 3 of these guys who we all kind of like the records, and we're going to have them each do a song, and we're going to listen and see what kind of hits us about those things. And I don't think that's ever usually the way it is. It's more like, well, we're going to, I don't know, there's too many behind the scenes psychological things involved. So if I will do them once in a while, I don't, maybe once a year I might do one, but these are my stipulations, are that, you know, and I don't really have a way of knowing if they're going to do this, but I say, you can't play anybody else as the one I did. In other words, you're going to have to evaluate. You're going to have to evaluate any of the people that you're doing in the shootout without giving your preferred provider the advantage of hearing the ones that have already come before him, because all you got to do is make it a half dB louder, and it's going to. So, because I have beaten out a lot of motherfuckers by saying, "Well, send me the one you got from so and so," and they go, "Sure," and I just make mine. Well, I mean, if the person is really good, I go, "Okay, well, it's going to be hard to beat this guy."
Yeah.
Let's just say they're amazing. Let's say the person is amazing. Well, I can still beat him if I make mine sound just exactly the same and a half dB louder. So that's not fair to the guy that, it's usually more like the lead singer in the band wants, his brother who's getting into mastering to do it. And we just want to hear a professional one versus his to be sure that it's worth it to spend the money or something like that. And they go, okay, I can totally understand that. And I always get those. So like I have to know if the circumstances are legit up front.
Well, I don't think you can control those kind of things that you mentioned before. I don't do shootouts myself. I may have been involved in a shootout unwittingly. But I guess I'm at a caliber that in the global, here in this country, really, that they don't really do shootouts as such. In America, UK, it's certainly a big thing. But in the two situations where I was younger and I had an opportunity to be in a shootout, I was like, what the fuck? Or in both cases, disgruntled A&R guys, this has involved the same label, so two shootouts, spaced fairly closely together. Whereas in both cases, they preferred yours, but the A&R thought that he didn't know how he would justify your name on the credits, and there was hey, radio may not want to play it, and all this kind of stuff, and politics, and hey, it's kind of how it goes. So really, a shootout, what is it? And it's still going to come down to someone's preference, and even then, if it's going to be dictated to or influenced by politics and things that are out of your control that have no bearing on the work and the output, then it's a kind of moot point of why would you do it? Unless of course you just like, well, I just want to see how I go against someone else. But then again, you may not even get to, unless maybe the winning, engineer.
Yeah.
So
I'll do them sometimes if they're going to pay full rate for it.
Oh, they have to pay. Well, I think it's a reasonable stipulation. I think at the very least, if you don't get paid for your time, if you're at least considered to be part of a small group for a shootout, at the very, very least, I think it's worth. And if they're not prepared to pay you for that minimum fee or whatever, just that alone, I think just for your own sense of self-worth.
Yeah. I mean, I've probably been in some that I wasn't aware of. I'm almost positive that's the case. I'm sure that somebody has sent me one track and paid for it, and it was part of an album, and somebody else got it. I have no doubt that happens, somewhat. But honestly, you know what? I don't chase after the major label shit anymore. It's too aggravating. I'm much happier doing the independent people that don't pull that kind of crap. Much. So.
Well, people are surprised when they ask me, how much, of the big stuff do you do? Big stuff, I guess, to them is major label. And I reckon I'd be fucking stretching it if I said 5%. And maybe I'd be, you know what I mean?
5% is probably more than me.
If that. So.
But because see, the thing is, there isn't big anymore. Like, okay, what is big?
Exactly.
All right. The super poppy kind of stuff that, you know, certain name guys do that do a lot of super poppy stuff. Well, it might be big to like 12-year-olds for about 3 weeks. But okay, what does that mean? You know, okay, you know, nobody that I know listens to the radio to know, like, okay, somebody like, you know, it's all very relative. Like, okay, tell me who won the Grammys last year. You can't tell anybody who won the major categories a month after it's over. Nobody cares. It's not like, and I don't want to be a cynic. I'm just saying that there was a time when there was 4 television channels and everyone listened to radio and they bought records and CDs, that big was a very quantifiable kind of thing. But it's also stratified now. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that, like, you could be a superstar producer in a field. You got to realize that in this country of 350 million people, that a huge hit on iTunes, or back when people were still buying, downloading music. Okay, let's just say, like, you know, 6 years ago or 7 years ago, in a country of 350 million people, the number one iTunes, you know, in like a week would download, you know, 10,000 songs, or maybe if they were huge, it's like Adele or something, like 50,000. Okay. 50,000 people are familiar in a country of 350 million. It's like so minusculely big. It's not even like daytime television big. Yeah. So you really have to have a perspective about it. Whereas I might work on something, or you might work on something that within this stratified field, okay, in 350 million people, there's like 1.5 million people that buy this particular kind of Americana rootsy kind of stuff that may be as exemplified by 30 bands, okay? And big, no. On the radio, no. But you might randomly run into somebody. Like, I ran into some guy that, like, you know, at some football thing, and my commercial real estate guy introduced me to him. I was like, what do you do? He's like, oh, I make these deals for the real estate for these new biotech, you know, so-and-so and stuff. I said, wow, that's cool. He's like, yeah. And he was young. He was like 35 or something. I said, so what kind of music you do? He's like, I'm into like Texas red dirt country. I'm like, really? I do that shit. And so, so to him, like the 10 bands I've worked with in that genre, he's like, wow. But he's one of those 1.5 million people out of a country of 350 that even knows that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
It's all a relative thing. You know?
It is. My take on it, I get asked by people who, you know, who's the biggest band you worked on, and from an outsider's perspective, I understand the fascination because it's a world that they're not exposed to. And I try to be very careful that I don't come across as being either, you know, too cool for school about it. But the standard answer of mine these days is, I try and answer. A lot of time I get stuck, and when I stop and think, I'm like a deer in the headlights. My brain just, you know, shuts down. But I often tell them, hey, you know, in all honesty, it's not about that, because the fee that you get from whether it's a major label or a known artist, you know, or an indie band has the same buying power, no matter where you go. And it's still the satisfaction of doing the work. And of course, it's nice to have certain names, you know, on your credit list for your credibility or perceived credibility and marketability and whatnot. But ultimately, you know, going back to what we were talking about before, you know, it's the rewards, the fact that you're doing what you love to do, enjoying the process, you know, doing work, you know, where we are, you know, I think most people would say they're generally dissatisfied with the work they do. Some people are happy doing their thing, but I think a lot of people are dissatisfied, and I think you and I are fortunate, and, you know, we worked hard towards it, that we, you know, in about 50s now, still managing to do what we love to do, and hopefully we'll still be relevant for the next little while. And it's an absolute blessing.
You know, if you, it's tough. Yeah, it's a rare day that I don't wake up with a super, super strong sense of gratefulness to be able to do this. But I also create, you know, I mean, it didn't just fall out of the sky. Like, I created this reality, but at the same time, I try and have a balance of like, well, I made this happen because this is what I wanted to do, and I couldn't conceive of doing anything but engineering music. And I figured out how to make that work purely out of fear for not having to do something else. So, but at the same time, I don't feel, I have huge gratitude. I have more gratitude now the past 5 or 6 years than I've ever had about it. For a long time, I had no gratitude about it at all. I'm like, look, I'm fucking great, motherfucker. Of course you should hire me. And this is what I do. Like, what do you mean I'm grateful to get this job? You should be grateful because I'm doing your gig. That was my position 20 years ago, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, those days are long gone.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your honesty, Dave. Yeah, got to hand it to you. I like you. I think as I've gotten older, I've just learned to become a lot more grateful. More importantly, gratitude to me now, you know, and I know it's one of those terms that gets, you know, almost a cliche of, you know, the attitude of gratitude.
It seems kind of schmaltzy, yeah.
Yeah, but for me, where the game changer for me with that whole gratitude thing was when I started thinking about what things I had, and I had to feel it. Once I started to feel the emotion behind it, then it started to kick in. And I think that for a lot of us, when we think about what we have today and what's in our lives that are good, once upon a time we're just a wish, you know, and maybe, you know, to have a space like this for me was just as an 18, 19-year-old kid was just a wild fucking dream, you know, not knowing how that would ever happen, if at all. It was just, you know, photos in magazines or, you know, going in and seeing other people's places and then, you know, and still, you know, I'm nearly 13 years in this building and, you know, I still pinch myself and, yeah.
And I mean, I don't have that yet. I'm maybe toward the end of next year, I will know pretty soon the pride and the gratitude of having taken the steps and done all the crazy stuff you got to do to be able to open that door to your facility and walk in and just like, that's a very different thing than walking in somebody else's facility as an employee. Even if you can do whatever you want, have whatever gear you want, stuff like that, you didn't put your shit on the line and sweat it out and build that thing. And, you know, I mean,
yeah, it's a different level. No one can love the child that you birthed yourself, so to speak.
No one can love the child as much as you do, the one that you get.
Yeah. But you're as good as them, my friend. You're as good as them. Buddy, we got to get out of here.
Thanks, mate. Been good to, you know, it feels like any of our other regular conversations when we check in on each other, see what's going on.
It's funny, you know, because the podcasts that I've done with the people that I know or have some relationship with generally has just been typical of a conversation that we would normally have. And, you know, there's no script, there's no questions, there's no anything. And I think they're the best conversations to engage in. But even from a listener's point of view, you know, I think people who don't know us at all, never met us, know very little about us, I think would probably enjoy listening to a couple of people who actually have a connection. And
I've listened to quite a few of yours. I haven't heard one yet that I didn't enjoy. So yeah.
Oh, well, thanks, man. Yeah. I also enjoy the ones where the people I've never met, because that's the reason. You know, I had a marketing guy saying, "What's the whole thing behind this podcast?" I said, "Mate, there's no marketing strategy behind it. It's just a very self-indulgent thing. And let's just see where it goes." But if it's driven by any intention, it's to, you know, just have some honest conversation, learn a few things, and hopefully inspire some kids to listen in and realize that, you know, they're not alone in, you know, their fears and their thinking, and Things are possible. There's opportunity. And while sharing the realities of, what does go on, still always have a message of hope at the end of it.
Yeah, I think I that's been a message through a lot of your stuff. And I think that is comes from your service work and your mentoring and stuff. And I think that's an important message. I mean, anybody that I've met along the way that's considered doing this, that has dabbled in it and is like, I might like to come, work with you. I was like, well, I'm always looking for somebody. I will tell them two things. I'll say, it really takes a lot of hard work, but if you're willing to do it, there's a fucking career for anybody. You don't have to be some anointed, golden eared. I mean, if you want to train yourself to do it and you are in love with it and passionate about it, then you should absolutely pursue it. It's because it's a viable career choice, I think.
Absolutely. And as the saying goes, when your why is big enough, the how will take care of itself. Yeah. Dave McNair, I love you, motherfucker. You're awesome.
I love you too, man. You're the best.
Thank you so much for your time. It was great chatting with you. Yeah, best of luck with everything. And we'll talk again real soon. And yeah, I'll be with you fucking right by your side, mate, as we march towards this new fucking building. It's going to be awesome.
I hope so. Yeah, I'm excited about it. I'm a little scared, but I'm excited. I have to call my friends like you for moral support. I talked to my friend Adam Exalves the other day, and I said, "Am I crazy?" He's like, "No, you're not," because I asked myself the same thing, and I don't think I'm crazy.
We all have a little bit of that. You know where to find me, buddy. All right, mate. All right, we're out of here. All right. Thank you.
Good day.
Good day. Thank you, everyone. Well, there you go. Dave McNair from Dave McNair Mastering in North Carolina. And thanks very much to Dave. And thank you also to the guys down at the Cave Hub in Abbotsford, Bond Street, Abbotsford. Boys down there, they've got a fantastic live stage. If you want to do any pre-production, you want to do some, there's a band rehearsal space. It's a licensed premises. If you want to do a little launch, a little gig, it's a cool little spot. So check it out, the Cave Hub in Abbotsford. So thanks to Farnham boys. Great supporters of me and what I do. All right, I'm out of here. Love you fuckers. Please be nice to each other. But more importantly, be nice to yourselves. And we'll see you next time.